I think, I was blessed by having my parents involved with their teachings of Raj Yoga meditation. And it was something invisible, but very visible that I could see in my parents when they started to practice meditation. They were nothing like what they were before. And after the meditation practice, I could see there was an aura, a peace, a lightness. But it's not like I could see them with my two eyes, but I could see them from the world behind my eyes. And that was when I started to really recognize the power of mysticism, that I could recognize that there is something going on beyond the five senses. So anything that's mystical has this very, very deep-rooted narrative going on inside of us, behind our eyes. There's this tremendous universe, this world of phenomenal ideas and thoughts and realizations and experiences about the journey that we, the soul, are on. And each of us have the power of bringing forth those mystical experiences into our thoughts, into our words, into our actions. And I suspect that mysticism will be on the rise because of this pandemic and everything that's been going on in the world. You can't help but turn inwards now. The question is, do you have the tools to do with the thoughts that you're going to bump into when you turn inwards? So mysticism right now is the call of the time for us to live from the world behind our eyes. We might not need to go anymore to a church or a synagogue, so to speak, to define our mysticism. But I feel that if we continue to practice our meditations, a prayer, contemplation, intimate connection with the divine, we'll be mystics everywhere.
Thank you for inviting me to be part of this wonderful group of people who have touched into the very heart of being. My story began when I was about, 5 or 6 years old. And my father had been kicked off the Bob Hope show, where he was one of the comedy writers, for an excess of high spirits. And we found ourselves in Brooklyn, the Sicilian section of Brooklyn, where I was sent to Catholic school. All right. Well, the problem was I kept asking the poor little nun every morning interesting questions. When Jesus rose, was that because God filled him full of helium? And questions like that. Well, every time I asked a question, she gave me 1,000,000 years in purgatory. And by the time I was 6 years old, I had many millions of years in purgatory. I went home to my father, the comedian. He found it hilarious. He took me to a movie that he thought would help my soul. It was The Song of Bernadette. Bernadette, the French girl who prayed in her grotto and saw the Holy Mother, Mother Mary. I was so impressed. I thought, me too. And I went home and I went upstairs, and there was a grotto-like room that we had. It was through a particular door. And Chicky, my magnificent dog, who up to that point had taught me everything that was important, she had her 8 pups and she was nursing. And I said, oh, Chicky, don't mind, please. I've got to find the Holy Mother like Bernadette. And I moved the dogs and I got down on my knees and I crossed myself. I said, Holy Mother, please show up for me in the grotto. I'll give up something. I'll give up chicken with lemon sauce. And I'll count to 10, counted to 10, no Holy Mother. I'll count to 27 and I'll give up my grandmother's artichokes, and I just kept giving up food. And just Chicky would come back looking at me sorrowfully and bring back her pups. Well, finally she brought back all 8 pups and she looked at me and suddenly I had a revelation. And I went to the window and I looked out at the reality out there, and everything was connected. My grandfather taking care of the fig tree, plane in the sky, everything was interrelated, and it was one great revelation of unity, of sweetness, of goodness. And I was part of it.
And yes, I was in Mount Abu, and it was a warm summer evening. And earlier I'd told Brahma Baba that I want to surrender my life to God. And he told me he knew it already. He had predicted it a few years earlier. And that evening, he asked a group of us to come to meet him. And we practice a form of eyes open meditation so that we're able to share the experience of the divine through the light in our eyes. And Baba gazed at me, handing me a bunch of jasmine flowers. And so I always associate the scent of those flowers with this experience. And as he gazed at me, it was as if there was a magnet that was pulling the soul out from here and carrying me to a different dimension, a world of light, infinite light. And in that world of infinite light was the source, the being, the supreme. And there was the connection of deep, deep knowing. This is the being who is the divine, and I, the child, connected with my parent. And the connection was absolutely one of melting into an ocean of love. I don't know how long I stayed there, but after some time, it was as if the voltage was reduced and I was able to come back into this dimension and see the others who were around. And that experience of going into the unlimited, being able to connect with the source, was a very, very powerful beginning to my journey, which continues till now. And even today, I just have to think about that drishti, that vision of the inner self connecting with the divine, and I'm transported into that experience again.
It was that divine space and time that I was walking through Kashi Ashram. And for years, I was angry at my father's death. We've been using the word Baba. In Italian and in Florentine, where my father is from, we use the word Babbo, my father, my father. And my father died when I was 8 years old on my birthday. And for years, I didn't realize that that was the ultimate gift he could give me, was his death. Not that I had wished him dead. And being 8 years old, I just thought he went to Italy and would come back eventually one day. And when he never came back in physical form, that's when I realized the anger. The anger and the rage were not because he had died, but because he had left me with extreme burdens and roles of being now the husband to his widow, the father to his daughter, the caregiver for the house. All of these masculine roles that were now appointed to me were kind of really draining, and they were causing that rage and that anger. And I remember walking through Kashi, and I was really thinking about the surrender, that surrender of being in the beautiful space of meditation. My adopted grandmother, Letty Milantana, was a beautiful yogi, was a meditator. She taught me meditation from 13 on. And so I had some source of knowledge of meditation. And for those who don't understand meditation, uh, there's many definitions of it. The one that I hold dear to me is basically to think deeply or focus. And I was thinking deeply on my father's death. And then I was thinking about my thoughts. I was thinking that because I heard this quote, you are not your thoughts, you are the observer of your thoughts. And I was observing my thoughts in anger. And it was in that moment that I said, he gave me the gift of my life. I could be me because of his death.
My mystical experience was when I was on my very first meditation retreat. I'd never meditated, and I went for a 2-week, what was supposed to be silent meditation retreat. I was unemployed, and this was my last money I had, and I felt this call to go. Spiritual friends showed it to me and said, "I think you should go." And we were about 10 days into the retreat, and I was really having challenges I would fall asleep. I wouldn't get anything. I didn't understand the language. There were people that had been meditating 20, 30 years. They were all spiritual teachers from United States. I was the youngest in the group, and I really didn't get any of this. And so this morning, it was the full moon. And all I remember is, I don't even remember what the actual topic of the meditation was, but we were going into meditation and we were laying down and we were in our circle. And I went in so deep, I don't even know how, but I lay there. And sometimes when you've been in meditation, you hear noises and it's like it's down a tunnel. It's so far away, it's faint. And I hear the facilitator, I hear my teacher, and she's saying, okay, everyone, it's time for lunch. But it was like a million miles away. And I was pinned to the floor physically. I was laying on my mat, but what was happening is I was being showered as though it was pouring rain with light. And I had my whole body, I had never, ever experienced it. I couldn't even move a finger, let alone sit up. I couldn't do anything. And I lay there, and I then hear the teacher, stop, stop, stop. Something's happening with Anna Larai. Everybody sit down, go into the quiet. And I am so blissed out. I've to this day, it is my most mystical and profound meditation experience.
When I had this experience of stumbling into unity consciousness, I had been meditating for many years. And I had many transcendent experiences where I was in other dimensions, and I had experiences with angelic realms and masters. But on this particular occasion, I had been in a silent retreat for about 6 or 7 days with a teacher of mine. And what was interesting, speaking of transmission, is that probably a couple of days before, I was sitting, meditating, and all of this Shakti, all of this energy was coming off my teacher and entering me. And I could feel it and I could see it with my inner vision. And it was a beautiful experience. And then the following day, I had been meditating most of the day. And at this particular time, it was a question and answer period. And I wasn't really paying attention. My mind was very still. And suddenly, I became the room, the big giant meditation hall with 300 people. I became the room, and I became merged with everything in the room, including everyone. And it was as if their thoughts were mine, their feelings were mine. And it's hard to put into words, but in this sense, it was as if my heart and God's heart were one.
Thank you, everyone, for being here, and everyone who's listening. It's an honor and a pleasure. And well, the story starts out actually quite normal. I was on my way to India. My husband was driving me, and I saw a road sign that said there was going to be an open house at this particular high school, St. Xavier High School, the next day. And we were perfectly happy with my son's school. He was perfectly happy. There'd never been a conversation about making a change. And I looked at my husband, I said, can you take our son to that tomorrow? And he went, okay. I think by then he'd learned not to question too much. But anyway, so I land in India. I go to the same ashram. It's 5 a.m., normal meditation time. I go to the same meditation hall. I usually have a similar, if not the exact same seat and everything. And I'm in meditation, deep in meditation. And it's almost toward the end. I hear people moving about just a bit, getting ready for an actual yoga class. And all of a sudden, I have this sense to ask Source, why did I feel like my son should go attend that open house? And why am I asking you such a crazy question? And all of a sudden I had the notion to look up at the ceiling of the meditation hall, and there was a giant X on the ceiling. And I thought, never seen that before. I'm taking that as a sign that, our son will get in, he should go, he wants to go, all of these wonderful things. All of that was true. It played out just like that. So a year later, exact same date, exact same time, meditation is the exact same time. I thought, I'm going to be a little cheeky here. I'm going to go back and I'm going to see if there's a big X on the ceiling. And there was not. It was replaced with a big heart.
My story starts really at 9/11. I was working in a corporate job at Microsoft. And when 9/11 occurred, there was a jolting in my system, an awakening, if you will. And I felt this compulsion to change the direction of my life and start to work for peace and compassion, which was evidently quite lacking in our collective world at that time. And there have been so many efforts in that area now. But at the time, I didn't know anything about mysticism. I just knew I felt this compulsion. So I learned how to meditate using Vipassana meditation. And I would go home every day, go back to my houseboat, and I would sit in meditation on Lake Union in Seattle, Washington. And after a while, these experiences started to occur for me. In one experience, I felt this energy coming into my body, over the top of my body. And it felt like me, only more grand. And I just accepted her as my higher self, my soul. As these events started to occur, I just went with them. I didn't speak about them a lot because no one in my circle of friends at the time had these kinds of experiences. And then one day I started to receive messages from spiritual masters like Jesus and the Dalai Lama. And I started to get direction, including I was guided to start to volunteer my time to create a United States Department of Peace, which literally required an act of Congress. And so I was sort of wondering, how do I participate in this? And one day, Jesus appeared in my meditation, and I was sort of making the case for why I wasn't qualified to go and lobby Congress for a Department of Peace. And rather than speak to me and try to convince me, he simply showed me a picture of my body, a visual of my body, side by side with the United States Capitol building. And then he showed me my body expanding in size until it was 2 to 3 times the size of the state capitol. And the message I received from that was that my spirit, this energy that had been coming into me post 9/11, was bigger than my human ego self, and that she was big enough to do any of the tasks that were put in front of me.
It's so wonderful and awesome to hear all of these amazing experiences that so many people have. This was something that I didn't grow up with. I grew up very entrenched in the church, and any mention of mystical was ostracized as evil or occult, and it resulted in this really deep fear that I had. And as a result of that, I stifled any experience that I had. I didn't believe it was real. I wouldn't let myself go there because I was terrified. And when I finally had my awakening, it knocked me off my feet, and it took years for me to discover and understand that, this fear causes us to block these encounters, and it's damaging to the church, it's damaging to people, to our souls. And so, as we go through this great awakening, it's so important for people who are just beginning to have these mystical experiences to have something that they can look at, to have examples of other people who have gone through this. And so that was what led me to share this experience.
I had been a seeker and a lover of the divine, of God, since I was very, very young. And I knew that I was a little off because when kids would always wish for, bicycles and toys, I would wish for peace for humanity. And I thought that was a little odd, but that's what would bubble up in my spirit. And later on, as I progressed, I have, as I said, been a seeker. I was on a pilgrimage to India, and I was at an ashram, and the monks there were taking us through a process. And in this process, we were lying down, And all of a sudden, as we were doing some breathing, I just sort of found myself in a place where I could feel this presence to my left. And I knew that it was bright light. It was a strong presence that my soul just kept wanting to turn directly toward. I wanted to see this light head on. And I kept trying to turn, but I couldn't. But I could feel the presence. I knew it was light and radiating so powerfully. And all of a sudden, before me were two figures on my left, a figure right in front of me, and two figures on my right. And the one in front, they were not visible to the naked eyes as if I could see their images, but I felt and knew because they were all emblazed in light. They were literally light beings. But I knew that the one in front of me was Jesus, the Christ, and the two on my left were these mystical saints called Sri Amma Bhagwan. And then to the right was Buddha, and behind Buddha was Krishna. Now, again, I couldn't see the physical features, but their souls were shining so brightly. And I remember them sort of talking to me. And as they were talking, I kept wanting to turn toward this light. I knew it was the Godhead. I knew it was this massive light of all lights. And I wanted so much to look directly into it. And I remember them saying, don't worry about trying to look at the light, because we are here with you and we are the embodiment of all that is in that light.
I think all of our co-authors in the book have actually offered tools for everyone. It always happens when you basically surrender, pause, step back a little bit, and just allow the divinity of God's light to flow through you and work through you. You've been struggling so hard with trying to control your life and control your destiny. And the minute you relinquish control is when you actually find you being control. So I think one of the greatest steps that I've offered in the book is to be able to focus on the world behind your eyes. I said it at the beginning, and I'll bookend it by saying it now. Step out of interpreting your life with your five senses and step in to interpreting your life with the world behind your eyes that is actually connected to the sentient aspect of the soul. Everyone here in this book have actually spoken and given proof. The energy of this light exists. It exists in you and exists in me, but we have to get out the algae thinking. Again, I mentioned this in the book. Anger, lust, greed, attachment, and ego is robbing us of this light to shine far and wide.